I'm honored to be asked to introduce a person whom I greatly admire. I've been teaching here at Huxley College for a long time and actually have used her work extensively in a number of my courses. And it has been a great pleasure to get to meet her and to hear her speak, which I have had the honor of doing several times. So in trying to figure out how to introduce her, first I want to read briefly from about something at Oregon State University, where she is a distinguished professor of philosophy, called the Spring Creek Project. And in the description of that, which is a university program, I believe it's in their College of the Liberal Arts, it says, the challenge of the project, Spring Creek Project for Ideas, Nature, and the Written Word, is to bring together the practical wisdom of the environmental sciences, the clarity of philosophical analysis, and the creative expressive power of the written word to find new ways to understand and re-image our relation to the natural world. And the reason that I wanted to share that with you is because that's, I think, exactly what Kathleen Dean Moore does in her books and in her teaching. And I know, too, that she was a founder of that program and its director for a while. That's what we are trying to do with the exhibits like the one that is currently here, to bring together environmental sciences, philosophical analysis, as we will hear today, and creative expression. And no one, I think, is doing that more significantly than Kathleen. In one of my favorite little books of hers that she actually edited, along with a couple of colleagues, In the Blast Zone, Catastrophe and Renewal at Mount St. Helens, which is itself an amazing story. It says, because Kathleen Dean Moore moved into her home in Corvallis, Oregon on the day Mount St. Helens blew, all she retains of the top of the mountain is a glass bottle of ash scraped from the hood of her car. And I'm sure that day she started thinking about the significance of that event, as many of us did. But mountaintops, rivers, and forests are the setting for her places. Her books, River Walking, Hold Fast, The Pine Island Paradox, and Wild Comfort, all reflect her thinking about this amazing Pacific Northwest region and the world in general. She is Distinguished Professor of Philosophy, has been University Writer Laureate, and Director of the Spring Creek Project. So it is with, one more thing. There's one line that she wrote that has had more impact on my students than any other sentence that they have encountered, or that I have encountered and used in my 46 years of teaching at Western. And it is this. She starts one of her essays in River Walking with this line: I wish to speak a word for the art of poking around. It has provided a theme for so many students. Thank you, Kathleen Dean Moore.
That was a lovely introduction. Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming out. I am so excited to be here. I have to just start that way. I love Bellingham. I think it's one of the most beautiful places on the face of the earth. And it's been given some of the most stunning gifts that the natural world has to offer: water and ice. And I've been over to the Vanishing Ice exhibit, which you have as well. Stunning, yes. Absolutely mind-blowing. I think it's wonderful. The other thing that I am really thrilled about is that I know that there are people in this audience who are people of extraordinary courage and extraordinary determination, who have been working very, very hard to protect the values that we all share. You know, it's easy to fall into despair It's easy to fall into the metaphors and the mentality of war, us versus them. But what really thrills me about Bellingham, and I think uniquely among all the places I've been, is that that's not the way people are here. That what I see here is this deep and abiding love for a place that's embodied in social responsibility and then transformed into courage. You begin with your love, link it to social responsibility, manifest it in courage, and become a community of caring unlike anything I have ever seen. So my thanks to you. It reminds me of the courage and the determination of your terns. Are they still there over on all that concrete? No? What they do is that they fly south as far in the fall as they fly north in the spring, and so they live all their lives in light. I want to be one of those beings. I want to be like that. I want to be like you. I want my vision to be driven by this extraordinary love of this place. So I'm not going to talk about politics today. I'm going to talk about love and what it means and what it calls us to do. In honor of you all and in honor of the vanishing ice, I actually was able to find a picture of Bellingham in the snow. We live in a hinge decade. That's really what I want to say. We live in a hinge decade. You could drive a nail through this time, and all of history would balance on that point. We're the ones who are going to determine how the history of our time is told. We're going to be the ones who write this story of our time, and honestly, it could be a crime novel. It could be a horror story. It could be one of these apocalyptic teenage novels. It could. The story of our time could be a thriller. It will be a thriller with 1,000 plot turns. It could be a nihilist, absurdist farce. But I want to help tell the story of this decade, and I think you do too, as a love story. A love story about love for justice and love for our children and love for the earth itself. So let's just start doing that. So what is the setting? I mean, we all know what you need in a story. You need characters, you need setting, and you need some sort of crisis. Well, we've got the setting. Let's go through a couple of the facts. The facts of the rising sea levels, the facts of the increasing amplitude of the waves. My colleagues at Oregon State writing little skidoo things out in the waves to document how much steeper they are getting. Heavier storms, climate refugees. But people would say, stop. We know those stories. We're tired of hearing those stories. And I acknowledge that. I really don't like to tell those stories either. So what I want to do is just provide you with two facts, and they're the ones that drive me and drive my work. The first one is that because of greenhouse gases, the atmosphere is now collecting every day an extra and excess heat equivalent to the explosion of 400,000 Hiroshima nuclear bombs. Every day, extra heat beyond the usual. Today, yesterday, tomorrow, 365 days a year. Fact number two. The result is, according to a letter from 500 scientists led by a Stanford team, that unless we take concrete and immediate action, by the time today's children have grown to middle age, the life support systems of the earth will be irretrievably damaged. Who are these children? I know one of them. There she is. Her name is Zoe. She's my granddaughter. She is at this moment walking the streets of your town buying beer-making supplies with her father. In the evening, Zoe lies in bed. She uses a nightlight because she's a little bit afraid of the dark, and she giggles and she sings herself to sleep. Her favorite self-lullaby is laugh, kookaburra, gay your life must be. So she sings and she giggles, and I think, when she's middle-aged, the Earth's life support systems will be irretrievably damaged. My Zoe, water to drink, fresh air to breathe, food systems to sustain her. I hear that child giggling and I say to myself, it's over, that's it. I love her too much to do anything but try to keep her world from slipping away. Who am I ask myself, this child's grandmother. What is my purpose on this earth? I am love for that child. That is who I am. And my purpose on earth is to honor the moral consequences of that love. So that's really what I've come up to talk about, is the moral consequences of love. First thing I want to say is a really hopeful statement, and I think that it's important to say. To be optimistic is to have hope and to back that hope up with love, and back up that hope up with data. So here's some data. This is James Hansen, a NASA climate scientist, who ran the numbers, and he says, and I think we have reason to believe him, that if we start this year, 2013, and if we achieve a 6% global reduction in carbon emissions this year and every subsequent year, and if we begin a massive global reforestation and soil sequestration campaign, we can keep the temperature rise on Earth below 2 degrees centigrade. If we wait until 2020, it's 15% reduction a year. If we wait until 2030, we have run out of time. So that's our work this year. We know what we have to do. I want to know how many of you think we can. And so I'm going to do a little poll here, if I may. If we imagine a scale, and if 0 is on that scale, there is no way we're going to achieve this, and if 10 is there is no a problem achieving this, limiting our climate increase to 2 degrees centigrade, where are you on that scale between 0 and 10? You want to think about that a minute? Will. That changes things, doesn't it? Of course we can. Okay, so how many out there are 10s? 9s? 8s? 7s? 6? 5? 4? 3? 2? 1? 0. You're a tough crowd. I've put myself on this scale at about a 4 until I taught a course with a whole bunch of students who wanted to learn about climate change and the moral obligations of our love for the land. And at the end of that term, my number was 6. My students edged me up that strongly, and the students also were edging up. And I said to them, what makes this increase? And all of them went around the room and they all said, it's because we have come into a community of caring. We've come into a community of very able people who are absolutely determined that we will make this work. I thought I was all alone. I was almost too lonely to bear. But now I understand that there are many of us in this struggle, and I see you here today and I feel exactly the same way. So here's what I believe. I believe that climate change is a scientific issue, it's a political issue, it's an economic issue, but it's fundamentally a moral issue, and it calls for a moral response. It's not only monumentally stupid, I would tell you, it's wrong to wreck the world. And to take what we need for our profligate lives and leave a ransacked and dangerously unstable for our world, for our children, that's a betrayal of our love for them. And to let it all slip away, the terns and the glaciers and the salmon and the streams and the ducks on the lakes, to let it all slip away because we're stuck like a to-do list to the refrigerator wall. That's unbearably sad, because it doesn't have to be that way. And when fossil fuel companies, to make astonishing and unimaginable profits, show themselves willing to take down the systems that sustain life on Earth, to trade those systems that sustain life in exchange for the executive salary of $32 million a year, what are we going to call that? Well, we're not into name-calling, are we? Even though, if someone were to ask me, I would call it moral monstrosity on a cosmic scale. We don't want name-calling. Doesn't get us anywhere. What we need is moral reasoning. What we need is giving reasons to support our decisions, giving reasons to support our views. And what we need is a reasoned public discourse about what are our deepest values, what do we care about the most, And what are the consequences of that caring? That's, I think, what we need in this country to get ourselves unstuck from our to-do lists. Scientists, bless their hearts, have done a beautiful job reaching a consensus about the facts of climate change and backing them up with evidence. And what we need is a corresponding consensus about the moral urgency of action, backed up by a clear idea of our values. That's what we need. And in case anybody has any doubts, let me pull a philosopher's move and offer you a categorical syllogism brought straight to you from Aristotle. Okay? Any argument that draws a conclusion about what we ought to do is going to have two premises. The first one is a factual premise. This is the way the world is. But you can't make a judgment about what we ought to do based only on facts alone. In order to do that, you need a claim about what we seek, what we ought to do, a normative claim based on moral reasons. What do we value? What should the world be like? What ought the world to be? If we have that, this is the way the world is, this is the way the world ought to be, then we can draw a conclusion about what we ought to do. And the reason that I'm emphasizing this in this place, in this time, is because I want you to notice, where do we do the work of the second premise? Where do we do the work of affirming our values? Scientists have their laboratories. What do the rest of us have? The point I want to make is that we have art. We have literature. We have churches. We have families. We have communities. We have classes. We have universities. We have neighborhood coffee shops. We have all the places where people come together to affirm what they really value. But the history of that discourse is recorded in our literature and it's recorded in our art, which is why it just thrills me to be here as part of an art show. Imagine inviting a philosopher to come to be part of an art show. What do we dream? What do we cherish? What do we seek? If we don't know this, if we're not clear about it, and I don't think we are in this country, then we don't know where to aim, and we end up in the kind of stalemate that we have perhaps now. So in order to try to advance this project of the second premise, my colleague and I asked 100 of the world's moral leaders to respond to this question, as many of you know. Do we have a moral obligation to the future, to leave a world as rich in possibilities as our own? We said, please answer that question in 2,000 words or less, because we know that the moral leaders of the world tend to be kind of prolix. They go on and on. And we wanted real snappy answers, and we got back a beautiful array of answers, and we categorized them in 14, which I listed here. But let me just say, yes, do we have an obligation to the future? Yes, for the survival of humankind. Yes, for the sake of the children. Yes, for the sake of justice. Yes, to prevent the greatest violation of human rights the world has ever seen. The list goes on and on, all these reasons, which turn out to be this joyous affirmation of what is good and what is true. It lifts me to see that moral reasoning happening. For tonight, I chose just 3 reasons, and I wanted to talk about them in case they're useful to you, to remind you of why we get up every day, knowing what we're going to do that day to turn back the global warming plague and save what we can of what's beautiful and what's right. So we're going to spend a little time now addressing 3 answers to the question, why do we need to stop climate change in its tracks to the extent that we can? And the reason I chose first is this one, because we love justice. We do. We do, and we think that people should have what they merit, what they deserve. So climate change, I would submit, is a violation of justice. And the problem is not simply that people will suffer, although they will. They'll suffer unjustly, in violation of any principle of distributive justice. And some people will enjoy the presumed advantage of the profligate use of fossil fuels. Some of those people will become obscenely rich, and they will do so by offloading the damage onto people who never knew its benefits and are powerless to resist, and even on those who are powerless to speak in their own defense. Who are these people who can't speak in their own defense? They're plants and animals. They're future generations. They cannot speak to us. Or if they could, we don't know how to listen. They are marginalized people, literally and figuratively, on the margins of the economy, on the margins of the continents, and they are the children. So what we have is this: if climate is undermined, if climate change is allowed to undermine the systems that sustain lives, what we're facing is the greatest violation of human rights this world has ever seen. I want to read you a quotation, a little piece by a woman named Sheila Watt-Cloutier, who is the former chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. Among the harms that we've suffered, both in Canada and Alaska, are the eroded landscape, the contaminated drinking water, the coastal losses because of erosion, longer sea ice-free seasons, and the melting permafrost. There are unpredictable sea ice conditions. Glaciers are melting, creating rivers instead of streams, and now we have more drownings. And it's becoming very stark, and it's starting to undermine the ecosystem, the very land, ice, and snow that we depend on for our own physical and cultural survival. What we are doing here is we are defending our right to culture, our right to lands traditionally used and occupied, our right to health, our right to physical security, our right to our own means of subsistence, and our rights to residence and movement. And as our culture is based on the cold, the ice, and the snow, we are, in essence, defending our right to cold. Reason number 2, because we love the children. Let's talk about the children. Children didn't make this mess. They don't deserve what's coming at them like a freight train, but they're going to have to live in what's ever left of the world after the fossil fuel industry gets done with it. I'm not even going to list the kinds of things that they are going to face, but I will just talk about one, which is the collapsed agricultural and fisheries systems. Well, 2, the wars for resources, massive movements of people driven from their homes. I asked my friend Brian Doyle, a Portland poet, I said, why do we have to stop global warming? And here's what he wrote me back. He said, because we swore and vowed to every god we ever imagined or invented or dimly sensed that we would care for our children with every iota of our energy when they came to us miraculously from the sea of the stars. Because they are the very definition of innocent, and every single blow and shout and shiver of fear that rains down upon them is utterly undeserved and unfair and unwarranted. And because we used to be them, and we remember dimly what it was like to be small and frightened and confused. And I would add, because we promised them. We held those little children in our arms and we promised them a world. So here's what obsesses me. What are we going to say when we're old and our grandchildren come to us with their own babies in their arms? They'll ask us what we did to stop climate change. But before we can bring our voices to answer them, I think they'll interrupt us. Don't tell me you didn't know. You knew. Don't tell me you thought there was time. You knew there wasn't. Don't tell me you didn't know what to do. Anything would have been better than nothing. Don't tell me the forces against you were too great. Nothing is greater than the forces against us now. The piece that I've chosen to illustrate that is from Severin Suzuki, who gave this talk in front of an international climate conference when she was, I believe, 13. And here's what she said. At school, even in kindergarten, you teach us how to behave in the world. You teach us not to fight with others, to work things out, to respect others, to clean up our mess, to share and not be greedy. Then why do you go out and do the things you tell us not to do? We are your own children. You're deciding what kind of world we're growing up in. Parents should be able to comfort their children by saying, it's not the end of the world. But I don't think you can say that anymore. My dad always says, you are what you do, not what you say. Well, what you do makes me cry at night. Reason number 3, because we love the earth. Let's change course. I am getting depressed by my own words. And it isn't fair to take you in on a beautiful afternoon and do the same thing to you. I want to talk about what we love about this place, just at least for a little while. I want to take a minute to rejoice in this place. I want all of us to call out the names of something that is glorious in this place and time. Let us fill this room with the names of things that are glorious in this place and time. I will start, you just chime in and shout it out. Western red cedars. Let there be no doubt. There is much to love in this world, and we are deeply, deeply in love with it. If we fail to honor and protect all those little lives, that's a failure of reverence, is what I want to say. We know what's being said about extinction. We know what people are saying about the sixth extinction, that we are entering into an extinction that has the same power to destroy as the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. I mean, say to me, don't exaggerate. I'm not exaggerating. There are many, many studies that are showing this, that by mid-century, we can expect that somewhere between 30 and 50% of the species will be gone. So what you can do is you can open up your field guides and lay them all around you, and you can start tearing out pages. And if you want to, you can choose what goes. But you won't be able to choose what goes. Generally, what goes are the most delicate and the most extraordinary creatures. Now, I don't know if you think that the world was created by God, or if you think that it was the result of the creative urgency of the universe. It doesn't matter. Either way, I think that we have a responsibility to take care of this earth. Let's just say for a minute that you believe that God created the earth, okay? Don't for a minute think that God is indifferent. God, if we're thinking about the Christian God, apparently is the one who created the world and then stopped at the end of every day and took time to say, and it was good. And it was good on Tuesday. And it was good on Wednesday, all through the week. I don't know. Are there any philosophers in this room? Okay. Never mind then. I was going to ask a philosophical question, but I'll ask it anyway. Can an omnipotent and omniscient God feel grief? If you think that he can, then I think we should be listening very, very carefully, because I would imagine a God holding his fist across his mouth, not so as not to awaken us, as he expresses and struggles and chokes on his own grief. That's an image that I listen for. But let's say you don't believe that. Let's say that you think the world was a result of the creative energy of the universe. All the same, wouldn't you agree that the world is irreplaceable? That it's essential? That it's beautiful and fearsome? That it's beyond human understanding and crazy creative? This is the language of the sacred. Reckless destruction is a failure of reverence. And that's what I would submit. And the piece that I've chosen to answer that are two paragraphs that are from the essay I wrote for this book. It's the call to forgiveness at the end of the day. And let me just say, as I intended to say, and I'm only now reminded, that the wonderful theologian Thomas Berry says that the Cenozoic period, the one that we may have just left behind, the one that we may be closing out, has been the period of the most lyric beauty in the history of the earth. And that this great abundance of species has been part of a song of the universe creating itself. That's what I wanted to say. As it happened, that was the spring when our granddaughter was born. I brought her to the pond so she could feel the comfort I had known there for so many years. Killdeer waddled in the mud by the shore, but even then, not so many as before. By then, the pond had sunk into its warm, weedy places, leaving an expanse of cracked earth. Ahead of the coming heat, butterflies fed in the mud between the cracks, unrolling their tongues to touch salty soil. I held my granddaughter in my arms and sang to her then, an old lullaby that made her soften like wax in a flame, molding her little body to my bones. Hush-a-bye, don't you cry. Go to sleep, you little baby. Birds and the butterflies fly through the land. I held her close, weighing the chances of the birds and the butterflies. She fell asleep in my arms, unafraid. I will tell you, I was so afraid. Poets warned us, writing of the heartbreaking beauty that will remain when there is no heart to break for it. But what if it's worse than that? What if it's the heartbroken children who remain in a world without beauty? How will they find solace in a world without wild music? How will they thrive without green hills edged with oaks? How will they forgive us for letting frog songs slip away? When my granddaughter looks back at me, I will be on my knees, begging her to say I did all I could. I didn't do all I could have done. It isn't enough to love a child and wish her well. It isn't enough to open my heart to a bird-graced morning. Can I claim to love a child if I don't use all the power of my beating heart to preserve a world that nourishes children's joy? Loving is not a kind of la-di-da. Loving is a sacred trust. To love is to affirm the absolute worth of what you love and to pledge your life to its thriving, to protect it fiercely and faithfully for all time. Here, in the face of all this, and in the face of all my scolding, for which I am deeply embarrassed, here's what lifts my spirits and makes my pulse race. Scientists are running the numbers. The data points are mostly in, they're almost all in, and they're running the numbers. And they know pretty well how the chemicals are going to respond. They pretty much know how temperature responds to the chemicals, how the oceans and the weather respond to the temperature. That's just geophysics. What the scientists do not know is how the people will respond. That is the missing data point. And that's the data point of all of the others that we have perfect control over. That is what's going to make all the difference. And that's what's going to send the model spinning in an entirely different direction. That data point is how the people will respond. And given that that's important, that it's that critical and that important, what is holding us up? And I want to spend just a minute on that. Our options are limited. Our cities and our homes and our transportation systems are disgracefully designed. Destructive ways of living are protected by tangles of profit and power around the world. Corporations are behaving like psychopaths, and we are running out of time. How do we deal with that? We feel we're caught in a trap. On the one hand, it's possible to have blind hope. I don't know how we're going to do it. I don't know how the earth's going to save us or something's going to save us, but it's going to all turn out okay. That's a kind of moral abdication because it allows us to say that I don't have to do anything because everything's going to be all right. And on the other hand, we have this blinding despair. We say, no matter what I do, it's going to be terrible. And so that's a kind of moral abdication too, because no matter what I do, it won't make any difference. So either we have this blind hope or we have blinding despair, and either way, we don't have to do anything. But that's a fallacy, and in fact, I can name it. It's a fallacy of false dichotomy, because between the blind hope and the blinding despair is this broad ground that we call moral integrity. It's not acting out of hope or acting out of despair. It's acting in such a way that you achieve a matching between what you believe and what you do. It's acting in such a way that you walk the talk, as they say. It's making your life into a work of art that expresses your deepest values. We all can do this. To live gratefully because life is a gift, and for no other reason. To act reverently because we believe the world is sacred. To live simply because we don't believe in taking more than our fair share. And to act lovingly toward the world because we love it. You see what I'm getting at? That this is not goal-directed behavior. This is virtue-directed behavior. This is character. This is acting in such a way that we are true to who we believe as our deepest and best self. And that may mean a fierce and tireless and maybe even tragic defense of the world against the people who would wreck what we so deeply value. So what does our love call us to do? I love that. That was provided to me by good Christian Martin up at the North Cascades Institute. What does our love call us to do? Well, let me just point this out. You all live by a river. I live by a river. We are river people. And we have spent more than probably we should have in the way of time standing by rivers watching how they flow, right? Or sitting by rivers watching how they flow. And what we've learned is what makes a river change. So we're standing by a river, and we see this. We are standing by a river. We see the incredible volume of its flow. We see the incredible energy in its flow. And we say to ourselves, I could never stop that river. And then you look a little bit more and you see that when there's a rock that's been placed in the river, it changes the course of the current. It's just one little rock, but it changes the current. And suddenly the current is slowed, it drops its load, and it curls around back, and it reverses its flow. One rock in that big river. And so we learn about the way the river flows, and we get some sort of sense about what we also could do. We can drop stones in the river. And by that means, we can change the course of the river in small ways. So I say that because I think that it's important to consider the possibility. So let me ask you this question. What do you love too much to lose? That's the question of the hour, isn't it? If we're interested in what are the moral consequences of our love, we need to be sure what our love is aimed at. What do you value more than anything else? What would you live for? What, in fact, would you give your life for? A value that deep. And this is not a philosophical question in the sense that it doesn't require an answer. This is a real life question in the sense that it shapes your life. So what I'd ask you to do is just for a few minutes, turn to the person next to you, perhaps not the one you already know, introduce yourself, and brainstorm with that person, share with that person how you would answer this question. What do you love too much to lose? What is your deepest value? Go. That was supposed to call you to order. I bet when you're on a trail and you hear a crow call, you stop and you look up. I love that. I love the volume of that because I know that the words that are in the air are words about what you really care about. Can we do the same thing again? Can we pop these words up in the air? Can we fill this room with the nouns that describe what we really care about? And if there's repetition, let it be a chorus, okay? We can't. Too hard? I have a dissenter in the crowd. Shall we shout him down? Okay, over here. What? What? Shout him out, shout him out, shout him out. This is good, this is good. This is what we should be doing, shouldn't we? Is putting out to the world a statement of what we really care about. Not keeping it closed up in our heart, but shouting it out every morning. This is what I'm living for. This is what I care about. Now, the second question, you know it's coming, is given what you so deeply care about, and given that love has moral consequences and invites you to an exercise of imagination as to how you might live in keeping with those values, then let me ask you to spend a little time in similar conversations asking one another, given what you value, What stone can you drop in this river that is taking us towards ruin? What stone can you drop in this river that is threatening what you more deeply value than anything else? Because I didn't hear a single thing shouted out here that isn't going to be harmed by global warming. Okay? Go ahead, see what you can come up with. Just a little stone. What if you did hear a wolf? Have you ever heard a wolf howling up in the hills? That's a cause for being quiet, isn't it? Now let's do this in a little bit more orderly fashion. I'm very interested in hearing some of the ideas, and maybe we could get them out in real quick fashion. So one person shout one out. What's an idea? Please. Pardon me?
Tell the truth.
Tell the truth. Oh my God, tell the truth. Stop eating meat. Magnetic stones. Educate. Walk. Oh, good. Recycle. Pardon me?
Say what's important.
Say what's important. Decide what's important. And take the bus. Focus. Good. Ask important questions and insist on a true answer.
Change policies.
Change policies.
Prioritize posterity.
I didn't hear it. Somebody help me.
Prioritize posterity.
Prioritize posterity.
How about listen to the other side with compassion?
Listen with compassion.
Question consumerism.
Question consumerism.
Stop eating dairy.
Stop eating dairy. Hey, she's on it. Education. We hear it again. Good. Uphold excellence. Yes.
The coal trains.
Fight the coal train.
Make art.
Make art.
Help women and kids find a voice.
Help women and children find voices. Grow food. I didn't hear it over here.
Change the corporations.
Change the corporations. Change the laws that require them to make a profit at any cost. Take your money out of big banks and put it into co-ops or credit unions. Take your money out of oil.
Protect special places.
Protect special places. You guys are good.
Indigenous wind power and solar power.
Solar power, wind power.
Support the guys you just voted in.
Support the people you just voted in.
Save seeds and give them away.
Save seeds and give them away.
Believe in the sacred.
Believe in the sacred. Honor the sacred.
Pray.
Pray.
Have all the little local groups that are all working towards the same thing come together.
Come together right now. Good.
Don't be afraid to speak your mind.
Don't be afraid to speak your mind. You know, I had a person in a previous presentation say, I go to the city council all the time and speak out, and they don't listen to me anymore because they've labeled me as an activist. And I said, well, you know what? If there were 10 of you, they would listen. If there were 100 of you, they would listen. If there were 1,000 of you, it wouldn't be activism anymore. It would be citizen responsibility. And I think that's true. There is real strength in numbers. That's wonderful. So let me tell you what I heard. If I could maybe kind of quickly summarize. I heard you first talk about this, what I would call conscientious objection. A stone in a river obstructs the flow. And so we can refuse to let big oil make us foot soldiers in their war against the world. We can refuse to march in the direction they want. And we know that every decision we make, how we travel, what we eat, as you say, what we invest in, how many children we have, how we educate them, what soccer shoes we buy for them, every decision we make embodies a moral value, and our decisions speak for us. Yes, I believe in this. No, I do not believe in that, and I will not participate. And that requires a joyous, radical imagination to think of new ways to live that are deeply just and deeply loving. I also heard some creative disruption going on here. A stone in the river is solid. It is a fact. Sometimes there is no getting around it. So I heard a lot of calls for truth-telling. a lot of calls for asking questions, a lot of people refusing to turn our eyes away or let our heart turn cold, facing the facts in every way we know how, even symbolically. And I heard some elements of courageous and relentless citizenship. This notion that a stone in a river is one of many stones, and that stones in great numbers divert rivers utterly. This is a democracy, so they say. Let crying out, let exercising our rights be what we do the first thing in the morning and the last thing we do before bed. There are many, many ways to be heard. I think you are fantastic. You've already given this a great deal of thought. You've already put your thoughts into action. You are on the way. So let me simply close by reading you some comments from Clarissa Estes, which I think are particularly important for people who live on the water. Do not lose heart. We were made for these times. Yes, for years we have been learning, practicing, been in training for, and just waiting to meet on this exact plane of engagement. I recognize a seaworthy vessel when I see one. There have never been more able vessels in the water than there are right now across the world, and they are fully provisioned and able to signal one another as never before in the history of humankind. There will always be times when you feel discouraged. I too have felt despair many times in my life, but I do not keep a chair for it. I will not entertain it. Despair is not allowed to eat from my plate. I hope you will write this on your wall. When a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe. There can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are built for. Together, we are a great ship, and we are under sail. Thank you. I'm always afraid of question and answers. But I would be happy to entertain questions and then engage in some discussion about what the answer might possibly be. This is a group, and that will be a group effort, okay?
I think we spoke with one voice in this county about genetically modified, engineered food, particularly fish and crops and so on. How do we convince the other parts of this state that that may be something that we want to consider labeling? I think that everybody ought to have a right to know what's in their food, and I would like to also know how Coeur d'Alene and Idaho would react to that same referendum on the ballot.
And you all heard the question, which raises questions also about the influence of money in elections. And how can conscience meet up on a playing field with extraordinary amounts of money? But the one thing that I think has a chance of beating out the economic arguments are the moral arguments. And I'd try that. What? Well, I'm saying that in many kind of cases, moral arguments are a trump card when it comes to making a case. People can't... That moral argument is more powerful than an economic argument because it's a trump card. Now, I'm not saying it's more powerful in this marketplace of ideas. But for example, you could make a very strong moral argument for slavery, but it would be wrong. And when you say it's wrong, that's an end of the discussion. So I would suggest that you look closely at how you might deal with the ethics of the question of genetically modified organisms.
The whole premise of your talk is based on believing in climate change and then what can we do to change that. But I think the bigger problem that we have is that so many people don't believe in climate change. And I don't know what we can do with them to what kind of moral argument to use with them to convince them that climate change actually is true and happening. So that would be my question.
Let's address that in terms of the practical syllogism. You remember my syllogism up there? Where if you reach a conclusion about what you ought to do, that's a valid argument. I could go back to it, but you have it in your minds, right? That's a valid argument. If the premises are true, the conclusion necessarily follows. So if you want to deny the conclusion, you have to deny one of the premises. Now, are you going to stand there and, as if you're a if you don't want to change, say, for example, oil company practices, you're perfectly happy wrecking the world, and you don't want to create any change or limit your freedom to wreck, then you can deny either of those two premises. You can either say, no, I don't see a problem at all with wrecking the world for the children. Or you can say, no, I don't believe the facts. What are you going to do? The logic of the situation forces people to deny climate change in order to reach the right conclusion about what we ought to do. So it should not surprise us that the debate is engaged on the field of science rather than on the field of ethics. Because it's very, very difficult for a corporation or anyone else to stand up and say, I don't value the future of children. I don't value the lovely things on earth. I don't even care very much about justice. That doesn't go over very well. How much easier it is to say, I believe that there's uncertainty in the conclusions of the scientists. So we should not be surprised. And my own view about how to deal with people who are climate deniers, the hardcore climate deniers, my answer is not at all. The number of people who still are certain that climate change is not happening is roughly equivalent to the number of people who are certain that Elvis Presley is still alive. I don't have time to be distracted because distracting me is exactly what they want to do. They'll learn.
I just wonder, what is your view on population control?
I like population. I think birth control pills are wonderful. They are wonderful. But I'm being facetious. Obviously, there are too many people on the earth, and obviously there are going to be way too many people on the earth. And overpopulation is really serious because it dramatically decreases our chances of coming up with solutions. As we transform, what we're doing is we're transforming the biomass of the earth into human biomass, right? Until there's very little left of the natural biomass and quite a lot left of human biomass. So I think that those people who debate the carrying capacity of the earth as to whether there is a limit, I think that there clearly is a limit to what the earth can do. The best answer, I think, and it comes from Alan Wiseman, the author of The World Without Us, who's been traveling all over the world looking for success stories in climate change. An extraordinary effort of journalism is finding, as other people have found again and again, that the best way to control the population is to educate and empower the women. That's our job. One more question. Where is it?
It's here. You said that there's strength in numbers, and I wanted to know what you thought about people who say that they don't have time to help the cause, or they don't have money to help the cause, because if you look at who's shopping at PCC, who's shopping at Whole Foods or co-ops, the people are usually on the wealthier side, or they're a lot more knowledgeable. What would you say to people who make those excuses? How would you help them start?
A kind of a sideways approach to your question. If I wanted to control the world, I would make people really, really busy. I would make sure that they could not feed their families without 2 jobs. I would make sure that they had to commute 2 hours every way to work. I would make sure that they could barely scrape by. I would do everything in my power to press them on their time. I would try to destroy the schools so they had to do their best to raise their children and educate them. I would destroy healthcare. I would destroy all the different things that allow a person to have time. And then I would make things that were really time-saving, like McDonald's, and the grocery store, and the automobile. And then pretty soon, because people had no choice, they would come to me and do what I wanted them to do. So the first thing I would say to a friend who said, I just don't have time to shop at the co-op, is that an example? I don't have time to shop at the co-op or I have to bag my own stuff. The answer would be, you are a victim. I understand you are a victim. You are a victim of a system that makes your time a commodity and then sells it back to you. Good. You folks, I love you. I love Bellingham. I love what you're doing with the coal trains. I love your art, science, community network, and I thank you so very, very much.